He wore the uniform every day for 8 months. He ate with them, drank with them, attended their briefings, laughed at their jokes, and stood at attention when the senior officers passed. He filed reports. He signed documents. He gave orders that were followed without question. He was, by every visible measure, a Nazi officer in good standing. He was not. What he was, who sent him, what he was looking for, and what it cost him to find it, is a story that didn't appear in any Allied record until decades after the war ended, and parts of it still haven't. By 1943, Allied intelligence had a problem it couldn't solve from the outside. There was something moving through the upper levels of Wehrmacht command, information, decisions, movements that suggested a source, something worth reaching. But every conventional approach had failed. Agents intercepted, networks burned, dead drops going cold within days of activation. A team couldn't do this. A team leaves a footprint. A team has weak points. One man, properly built, properly placed, that was the theory. The selection process was quiet and methodical, almost surgical. Everything about it felt controlled, precise, institutional. What they were selecting him for was none of those things. His briefing lasted 2 hours. No documents were produced. No written orders were issued. He was given a target, a cover, and a date. He was not given a way out. They built him a life that had never existed, a rank, a unit history, campaigns he had supposedly survived, wounds that explained scars he didn't have, a hometown, a father's name, a party membership number with a paper trail carefully aged to match. The behavioral training went deeper than language. They taught him how a Wehrmacht officer holds his shoulders in a corridor, how he responds to a superior without hesitation, how he laughs at the right moment and stays silent at the right moment, how he carries the ideology, not as belief, but as posture, as reflex. They told him the psychology would become automatic, that the performance would eventually run itself. They were partially right. What they hadn't prepared him for was the first morning inside the Reich, standing at a window, watching the machinery of it move below him, and feeling nothing unusual at all. That was the moment that should have frightened him most. It didn't. The Allies didn't need a document. They needed a decision. Somewhere inside Wehrmacht command, an operational framework was being finalized. Troop movements, resource allocations, the kind of strategic architecture that, once implemented, would cost tens of thousands of lives to reverse. Intelligence gathered from outside couldn't confirm it. Intercepted communications suggested it existed but couldn't locate it. Someone needed to be close enough to touch it, not for a day, not for a week, close enough, long enough to understand how it moved and who controlled it. He needed months inside the structure before the target would become visible. That was the reality nobody wanted to say directly in the briefing room. If he failed, the framework would be implemented without Allied knowledge. The casualties that followed would have no explanation attached to them. 3 weeks in, he found the first thread. He didn't pull it immediately. He waited, watched it, made sure he understood exactly what he was holding before anyone outside knew he'd found it. That patience was the most dangerous part of what he did. Every morning, he became someone else before his feet hit the floor. The identity wasn't something he put on. It was something he had to reconstruct. Every day, from the inside out. The walk, the tone, the controlled contempt that the rank required, the opinions he expressed at dinner, the ones he kept completely silent about. Months in, a senior officer requested his service records for a routine verification, the wrong kind of attention at the wrong moment. He didn't panic. Panic was a luxury the cover couldn't afford. He redirected the request through a contact 3 levels up and waited 48 hours to find out if it had worked. It had. Barely. Somewhere in that middle period, he stopped counting the days. That was when it became something harder to name. The extraction was unremarkable. That was by design. He walked out the same way he had walked in. quietly, without incident. From the outside, it looked like a routine transfer, an officer reassigned, paperwork processed, nothing that warranted a second look. What he carried out wasn't physical. It was in his memory. Names, dates, the specific architecture of a decision-making chain that Allied Command had been trying to map for 18 months. Within 72 hours of his debrief, 3 separate operations were redirected. The framework never reached implementation. The debrief lasted 4 days. Most of it was classified before the transcript was finished. His handlers noted one anomaly in the report. When asked whether he had ever felt his cover identity compromise his judgment in the field, he didn't answer. He looked at the wall for a long moment. Then he asked to be excused. Nobody pushed him on it. Nobody wrote down why. A service number, 2 lines of administrative notation, a discharge date with no citation attached, for a mission that redirected Allied operations and likely shortened the timeline of the war in that theater. The documentation is almost insulting in its brevity. No formal recognition was ever issued. There are theories about why. The most credible one isn't about security, it's about what recognition would have required. An official account of what he did, and more specifically, what he became in order to do it. People who knew him after the war described a man who was quiet in a particular way. Not withdrawn, not damaged, visibly, just careful, precise about what he said and what he didn't. There is one detail that appears in a single declassified footnote and nowhere else. In the months after his return, he was observed on 2 separate occasions wearing his Wehrmacht insignia in private. No explanation was ever recorded. None was ever asked for. His file is still mostly sealed. The footnote about the insignia has never been fully explained, and the question his handlers refused to push him on, nobody has answered it publicly. If you want to go deeper into the stories history decided to leave unfinished, subscribe and leave your theory in the comments. Some of you will be closer to the truth than the official record ever got.